if you move into green hydrogen, which you have a derivative such as ammonia that produces things such as fertilizers, the fertilizer global market is very volatile. And if you can be able to produce your own fertilizer at home and also export that fertilizer, you actually have
Foreign exchange.
foreign exchange. So you got that FX.
The views on this show are those of the hosts and the guests and do not in any way reflect the views of KenGen. Some discussions may include forward-looking statements, but those are only for general knowledge and information purposes. Welcome back to this episode of the Energy Post podcast. This is where all the big conversation about energy in Africa take place, because there is nowhere like this where we discuss what energy means to you and what it means for our future. My name is Frank and I work for KenGen, and I'm here with our co-host,
Evelyn Mwaura.
So now we come from last week's history, and today we are going to discuss the future, where we are going to move from the Olkaria 1 geothermal power plant to look at the future of green energy. And there's no better person than the GGGI, the Global Green Growth Institute, to talk about this future of green energy in Africa and other developing countries. So to discuss this is Nagnouma. Please tell us about yourself.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's Nagnouma. So the G is just silent. It's in a way it kind of rhymes when you remove the G from there. Yes, from the name. And in my mother tongue, it just means good mother. And
Good mother.
yes.
Wow.
So the na is like mother, Numa is good, so it's like good mother. I have a bachelor's degree which I got in Australia and my master's degree in environmental sciences, in which I majored in environmental law from the University of Cologne in Germany. I think I've been working more than 14 to 15 years. I started working immediately after my bachelor. Actually, I was working for the Environmental Protection Agency of Australia, Newcastle. And then after that, I worked a little bit, got enough resources to go and do my master's as a self-paying person. So, I mean, since my master's, I've mostly been in diplomacy, moving from one country to another, but mostly working really in the green sector and climate change adaptation, sustainability, with a lot of international organization, but also with private sector entities and DFIs. Prior to joining GGGI, I was at the African Development Bank. So after AFDB, get GGGI, I find myself in Kenya. And so it's really been a roller coaster of trying to mostly work with developing countries. Principally, my interest is African countries because I feel like there's something I could contribute and leave a little legacy behind. I just to see the continent moving in the right direction and the little contribution that I can make.
I want to see the Nagnouma growing up. Where did you grow up and how was life then? Did you always have this dream of having this wide range of career?
No, I think first when I was growing up, one of the things I can say is I never had an issue with mathematics, physics, or chemistry. So for me, I think getting into the degree I got to was actually the laziest way of getting in, because I didn't want to study and do things like law, which a lot of my other friends and classmates were all gearing into doing law and medicine. And I'm just like, well, I don't have to study for maths. I don't have to study for chemistry or physics. They come very naturally to me. So engineering is really the easiest way I can go. And I did manage to get into bachelor's with what we call unconditional offer, which is you get into the university even without finishing your degree because the grades were actually consecutively good. Yes. And I think that comes from the fact that I always loved solving complex issues. And this actually shows also character in my career, because it's always about how do you use a systems way of thinking and combining that to solve some of the toughest challenges that we have right now. So it's kind of like my brother says, system engineering thinking with green growth. And this is what he thinks I do. But I think in a way, he's absolutely right. But when I was growing up, grew up in different countries, Kenya including is one of them. And
Grew up in Kenya?
Yeah, I did.
I want to hear that.
Some years here, yes. I actually did my high school here. So I graduated from high school and went to university.
Which high school?
Oh, you want me to say that? Actually, I'm
They are
a
watching.
Brookhouse alumni. So cheers to all the Brookhouse alumni. Yeah, so I'm happy to be back.
But most are curious, where were you born? From which country are you from here? Cote d'Ivoire?
Cote d'Ivoire, yes.
That's in West Africa.
That is in West Africa. So it's a francophone speaking country in West Africa. So we moved a little bit, eventually found ourselves in Kenya. Then from Kenya, I did 1 year Sweden, and then moved from Sweden to Australia, then Australia to Germany, then around the world, and now here.
You can tell us about GGGI and your work in Kenya.
Yes, I think for people who are not in the field of policy and green investment and sustainable finance or even climate change, GGGI may be quite distant for them. It's kind of like, okay, it sounds like something green, but that's why I actually enjoy my work, trying to inform people what we do and also the impact we are having, because we have GGGI as an impact-based organization. So Global Renewable Institute, which is the full term of that, is an intergovernmental organization. It's an international, intergovernmental, and also a treaty-based organization.
About 50 countries now?
55 countries, actually. Luxembourg just joined about two weeks ago, so making it 55. So our headquarters is in Seoul, South Korea. However, we have regional offices in Latin America, Caribbean, in Asia, in the MENA region, as well as in Africa. So the regional office for Africa is in Côte d'Ivoire, in Abidjan, in the capital. Just also because at one point in time, having the AFDB and a lot of DFIs in Côte d'Ivoire made practical sense. So the vision and the mission of GGGI is, how do we work with our member states? Remember, I mentioned it's a treaty-based. So a treaty-based international organization means that countries have to have an accession instrument, which is mostly signed by either parliament, to become a member of GGGI. So it is an organization that is composed of member countries. So Kenya is the 50th member and the 10th for Africa. Our vision and our mission is, how do we support countries to move to a green economy or even to net zero? And we do that by first assessing what are the challenges that the country is currently facing, to some kind of, maybe it would be a gap assessment or investment analysis or climate, just the climate architecture, before deciding what value addition could GGGI add. Now, when I talk about value addition, it means that as an organization that became international in 2012, we're pretty young. So it means we are not coming in to say we are coming to solve the world, but trying to come in with a niche to say our support is working with the government, collectively with other development partners, the private sector, CSOs, NGOs, CBOs, collectively, because it is something about partnership, right? You cannot solve global challenges alone. You have to work with other partners. And to work very closely with governments, what we do is we are embedded. So that means that if you go to almost all GGGI member countries, you will not find GGGI sitting somewhere different. We are always embedded within ministries. For example, in Kenya, we are in two ministries, the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change, Forestry, as well as within the National Treasury. So we do not have an office outside that, because we feel that the right way to support countries to get to that green economy or even to achieve net zero is to work very closely with them and become a trusted advisor in providing technical assistance, technical advice, and even sometimes structuring how a country can be able to effectively mobilize green investments to get the direction that they wish to go.
Kenya recently became the 50th member state. What does that mean is it just symbolic, or is there any tangible benefits on ground for Kenyans?
Well, I don't think it's symbolic for Kenya. I think it's actually a strategic direction that Kenya took because, as you know, the global trajectory nowadays is that the world is moving into a decarbonized economy. And therefore, a lot of resources are now found in decarbonization. So Kenya's strategic decision to join GGGI at this point is also recognizing that Kenya wants to be at the forefront of discussions when it comes to global green economy. So how do you become at the forefront of that? You have to be able to be a member of an organization that will give you that platform. So the platform to be there. Secondly, also it is the advantage that Kenya gets to have. First, you get to collaborate, cooperate, and get technical assistance and even structural support on your financial mechanisms that is needed for Kenya to be able to achieve its green economic strategy, but also its development goals. So in order to do that, Kenya cannot do that outside. So being a member of GGGI is not only symbolic to show Kenya's leadership in the direction of the country heading to a green economy, but also strategic in the sense that in order for us to get there, we need to be on the right roadmap and we need to collaborate with people of the same mindset in order to get to that vision. So it is more the strategic aspect than it is on the symbolic.
All right. I want to now speak to the local Kenyan town. I'm happy to hear that you grew up in Kenya. And therefore, I'm sure you know some one or two Swahili words here and there. There's somebody called Wanjiku in this country, who is the common mwananchi. When they hear green growth, green hydrogen, green economy, what does this really mean to them, to the common person down there?
Green economy and green growth is something that they should be actually advocating for. And that is because there's no time in the human, I would say in the human sphere or timeline whereby we have undertaken such great transition and a leap. People say that we are actually now moving purely not into industrialization. We are building green cities. We are decarbonizing the economy. We are developing green industries that will provide green energy. And all those are jobs.
Yes.
So a lot of the time when the youths especially hear about green growth, they think green means that we are not going to develop. But actually, they have to be able to work together. One does not mean the other one is not good, but it basically means that we are shifting our mindset on how effectively development needs to be established. So for the youth, you now see a lot of what we call greenpreneurs. These are youths that are coming up to say that Kenya has a law, a circular economy waste law that comes to things like plastics. If I can be able to recycle those plastics into something useful, then it becomes much more greener, and that is called circular economy. So we are moving in a dimension whereby waste is becoming valuable because we are going green, whereby renewable energy is the way to go, which means that we're now opening a lot of industries that are focusing on green energy and therefore reducing the fossil fuel consumption. Kenya, for example, 90% renewable energy, 45% coming up from geothermal. You're hiring a lot of technicians. A lot of those technicians not necessarily have to have a university degree. Some of them have a TVET degree, and this is creating the green jobs. So there needs to be a demystification behind what green is. And it doesn't mean that when the economy is going, let's say, net zero or decarbonizing, it means that there will be a reduction in jobs or that AI is going to come over. It basically means that there is a system shift in the way we used to work to a much more efficient way of working, which creates more opportunities for youths to actually get involved, for people to get involved. For example, green hydrogen. So green hydrogen can actually, one of the derivatives of hydrogen is actually ammonia. Yes. Ammonia is a fertilizer. So when you have an agrarian society, because Kenya produces a lot when it comes to agriculture, and you can be able to produce local fertilizer in Kenya, can you imagine the benefits for all of the farmers? And the benefit for farmers is not just production, but production, there's also cooling, there's transportation, and there's selling, and there is packaging, and there is even the recycling of the packaging. Across the whole value chain, you have youths and job opportunities that are created. There is a lot of potential. However, for that potential to be unlocked, that's where the policy comes in. There has to be the right policy structures that are established. There have to be the right incentive mechanisms that back those policy structures. There have to be incentives for the youths to get involved, and also to demystify that and say that you don't necessarily need a white collar job, because there's a lot of potentiality in the other sectors which are not necessarily white collar jobs. So this is where the work of GGGI comes in. How then do we support Kenya build that support is what we do. We don't come in and say we're going to do it. We work hand to hand with the government and say, how do we effectively then develop the right policy structure and instrument that will act as the architectural baseline to ensure that if you're going to have incentives, energy incentives coming in, they have something upon which they're hinged on, and therefore they become much more stable, sustainable, and incentivizing. And also what it does, it also creates this de-risking mechanism whereby the private sector also sees the value addition in investing. And once they start investing, this is how we actually accelerate economic growth.
At this point, you can tell us about green hydrogen. It's a term we've all had, but make us understand the Wanjikos they are talking about. What's this green hydrogen, and what advantage does Kenya have over it?
Specifically, how do we get green hydrogen? Because we already had the terms being from definitions, but then how do we get green hydrogen in Kenya?
Yes, I think Kenya is already excited about green hydrogen, because you had the green hydrogen roadmap that was actually approved at the first Africa Topic Summit, was hosted in Kenya. And since then, I believe the State Department of Energy has been trying to do a lot in terms of how do they unpack that roadmap into something that is just not an action plan, but something that is much more operational, that can also be able to bring in the private sector. So in simple terms, what is green hydrogen? So green hydrogen is basically how's it called? Hydrogen that is produced through electrolysis. So water is split into hydrogen and oxygen. So we call it green when the method of electrolysis is actually green, such as geothermal, wind, solar, because it does not emit any form of carbon dioxide. So that is when it's called green hydrogen. But you also have gray hydrogen, which is the same is produced, but it is produced using natural gas, and you do have some carbon dioxide emissions. So that's the difference between the green hydrogen and the gray hydrogen. So green hydrogen by itself is an energy carrier. It's not an energy itself, and it's much more useful when it comes to hard to abate sectors such as cement sectors and the shipping. And this is where, for example, in a country like Kenya, where you have 90% energy, renewable energy, green hydrogen fits very well into the energy mix if you have renewable energy surplus that can be used as the electrolysis for green hydrogen. Now, what is that? What is the benefit for Wanjiku, Shiro, Peter, and Otieno? The thing is that when you are producing green hydrogen, you need to do that in factories, right? Those factories create manufacturing jobs. They need technicians, yeah? And so all of those are job creations, not only job creations, but job creations for the future, because technicians will be the ones that come up with much more innovative solutions that can be used just beyond the green hydrogen. So in a country like Kenya, if you move into green hydrogen, which you have derivatives such as ammonia that produces things such as fertilizers, you're looking at two things. First, farmer food security. The fertilizer global market is very volatile. And if you can be able to produce your own fertilizer at home and also export that fertilizer, you actually have
Foreign exchange.
foreign exchange. So you got that FX, right? And so you have foreign revenue coming, but at the same time, you're actually having some form of fertilizer security for the local farmers, which makes production of agricultural products much more cheaper.
And actually, we're talking about that, Kengen currently has one of our partners setting up at our Green Energy Park. We call them Kaishan, and they are actually in the process of building a fertilizer company, drawing it from about 165 megawatts of geothermal energy. So that is what you're talking about. But let us talk about the money now. And I'm happy to hear that you're treaty-based. It means, therefore, that you agree on these things at the global summits and all those places where all the presidents sit. There's this dilemma in Africa and the other economies that usually we get promises at the summits. But how does that money get down to the country level?
Yeah, I think that's a difficult one because there are so many layers to that. A lot of the time people will say like, okay, when it comes to climate finance, there's a lot of resources there. How is it that Africa, at least as the continent, is not able to mobilize the finance that is needed for climate? And how is it that we struggle with investors' confidence? I don't think the issue is lack of resources. It's really not lack of money. The money is there. The challenge we have is how investment ready is your project, and also the cost of risks.
Yes.
The cost of risks in Africa is very, very high. Now, let's focus on how ready, investment ready are you? A lot of the time, either it's going to be the private sector or even government institutions are going to say, I have a strong pipeline. However, a concept note is not a pipeline.
Yes.
For a pipeline to be there, sometimes you need to have that feasibility, and the pre-feasibility must have been done. You need to have social safeguards that are already in place. You need to have a de-risking mechanism that is already in place. Once you have all those, capital is easy to come through, but capital has to follow a certain pathway.
Yes.
It's not simply because there has been promises that have been made about resources
It's
or
all right.
climate finance that it's your right, you deserve it. Those mechanisms have to be in place. For example, if you take the energy industry in let's say even in Kenya,
Yes.
you have abundance of solar and wind as well. However, you will find that it will be very difficult for you to be able to mobilize capital. Why is that? Because there is higher risk. There's higher risk because you have no de-risking mechanisms. And sometimes investors want to think, how volatile is the market? How volatile is the foreign exchange? How do I know that this initiative is going to be bankable for me? How ready am I to invest in perhaps in a country whereby when it comes to sovereign FX, there is a little bit of challenges. So it is an issue, it's multi-layered. What we do, for example, with countries is when we are supporting in portfolio development is first to do a prioritization exercise that will be able to filter down based on the concept notes that you're sharing with me or these how is it called, proposals that to actually think are investment ready. Can we assess them in terms of also the investment risk? Who is going to de-risk this? Is it the government? Is there a DFI? So those are all the questions that you have to ask. How ready is this project for an investor? And if the project is not ready, how do we support with the readiness of this project for it to be attractive to an investor, or at least even de-risk it a little bit that the investor has a little bit of confidence to invest in your initiative? So it's not something that takes a day. Sometimes it takes a lot of months because first there is capacity building.
Yes.
There is ownership that has to come in from the government as well. And there's in addition to the ownership, you also need to put down in place architectural foundations such as concessional layers that have to be in place, whether it is loans and guarantees. Where are those going to come from? Who will be the risk bearer of that? How effective do we know that if this initiative is perhaps given to an investor, the investor will be able to invest in this? And the ratio of investment, sometimes it has to be a concessional loan. And when it comes to concessional loan, the government has to be involved, right? Or another private sector entity has to be involved. Are they available to do that? So just saying that we have investment and bankable projects does not necessarily mean that that is in the case in the point of view of an investor. So for those to be investable, it has to really align to the needs and the requirements, and it has to be having some form of de-risk mechanism at the back to make an investor find it interesting. And that's how we support government.
Can you talk about the knowledge gap in case there's that person in Kenya who wants to get assistance from GGGI in terms of climate financing? What are you doing about that?
GGGI works very closely with governments, right? So the first thing we have to do when we are looking at investment initiatives is, if we support the government to be able to mobilize investment, how is that supporting maybe with Kenya's NDCs or energy strategy, or even the job market, your green job creation? So whatever we do has to fit into the trajectory of the development goals of Kenya. So that's the first thing. That means first government, and then working together with private sectors and financiers to support those kinds of initiatives.
Nagnouma, you're evidently a woman doing great things in the green economy strategy space. So what does this mean to you and to any little girl watching you today?
When I was growing up, my father was, he trained as a doctor, and then later he changed into environmental sciences. So terminology such as biodiversity conservation, ecosystem services. I grew up in that. And so when people understood those as academic nuances, for me, they were just everyday rhetoric I heard day in, day out. And one of the things I can say is, when I was sometimes sitting in those meetings, because sometimes my father has no choice but to pick me up from school and tell me, sit down, do some crayon work when I'm in the meeting, I noticed a lot of the time they were actually men. And I used to think it was a man business. And when I got into engineering, indeed, working, we were only about 5 or 6 women. It was always a male thing. But I think society has evolved significantly, especially over the last 20 years. And I never find myself as the only woman nowadays in policy discussions or financial conversation, or even in diplomacy conversation whereby deals are negotiated. There are other women, and more importantly, there are other women who look like me.
And speak like you.
And they speak like me. And I think what is inspiring is that when you find other women in these spaces, we don't clap our hands and say we made it. Actually, we actually say, how do we make ways for other young women to get into the field? In the international environment, it's actually not easy. It's not easy because it's competitive, right? It's a global competition. Everybody wants the same thing. The jobs are advertised and 1,000 people apply. You're one of them. But I think for young women out there, what I can only advise is that first, you have to be really authentic, right? And you have to be natural in your talent and do what is coming naturally to you, because I think that is where that X factor comes in terms of motivation and inspiration and the ability to go above and beyond.
If there's any mindset or policies you wish to change to accelerate the green transition in Africa, what would it be?
The cost of capital in Africa, because a lot of the times you find that economic growth is a little bit slower in the continent because capital cost is very high. And if there is a way in which maybe governments can be able to take a little bit more risks and reduce cost of capital by developing ecosystems that de-risk a lot. It will mean that we will see a lot of economic growth. We will see a very high economic growth in the continent. Because Africa, it's not a lack of renewable resources. We do have that abundantly. It is not a lack of education. A lot of our youths are highly educated. And it is not a lack of infrastructure, because the infrastructure is there. When you look at Kenya, for example, 90% renewable energy, that's impressive. I mean, when you look at it globally, that is
Sometimes
impressive.
it's up to 97%. On a good Sunday, it will be 97%.
Exactly. Now, with that 97%, we shouldn't be having power cuts, right? Because we have an amazing base load. However, in order to have those infrastructure that we have already established, there has to be in ways in which there's a lot of investment coming either to stabilize those infrastructure or building better upon them, but not just building infrastructure and then letting it grow by itself. So I think if the cost of capital could just reduce significantly, we will see a lot of economic shifts, especially among the youths, because that is where they struggle. And with a continent with the highest amount of youth, you reduce the cost of capital with all these brilliant minds, these Gen Zs with all forms of AI apps. We are going to see massive economic growth that is also sustainable at the same time, because when it comes to green growth policies and strategies, we have it all. However, implementation is still a challenge, but for that to be rolled out effectively, we need to have reduced capital to kind of boost the youth from the bottom.
I think that whole discussion has changed someone's mindset today about the green growth strategy and green in Africa.
Of course, and we hope it has. So this has been your edition of the Energy Post podcast. We've had a very exciting conversation here that we have left halfway, because there is much more to say. Because there's nowhere than here that all the big conversations in energy in Africa happen. We'll be bringing more of these discussions next week and the week after. Thank you very much, Nagnouma, for giving us this lively conversation. I've been your host, Frank.
And I've been your host, Evelyn Mwaura.
Keep it here, subscribe, watch, and do remember to leave your comments on the comment section, and also share this with your friends. This is the Energy Post podcast.